for people with uteruses, people who are able to get pregnant and have babies, to be able to make choices and to have control over their own lives in all sorts of ways, including to choose whether or not to birth. So mahalo nui for this opportunity.
Mahalo, everyone. Aloha again. My name is Ihi. And the way that I came into this work regarding wahine health and advocacy, it really started at home and at a young age. So I got my waimakalehua or my period at 11, so kind of a little young. But since then, I've always had a really complicated relationship with my waimakalehua, and it's pains, it's inconsistencies, and being told from a young age around 14, 15, that there might be fertility issues, and like hearing that at so young, like that's something that really made me like scared, but also there was a lot of shame around like periods of waimakalehua. So coming from that at a young age and now being 23, wanting to unpack that shame and that pain is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm also really lucky to have 5 sisters, 2 of which have given me now 6 incredible nieces. And so thinking about reproductive justice, wahine health, and the health of all Kanaka is really important to me. And the ability to choose how we want to grow our mo'oku'aha or even choose not to is something that I'm really excited to talk about today. Also getting connected with Affirm Hawaii and with Affirm being a part of the Women's Coalition, seeing how these issues regarding reproductive justice are widespread and connected to issues of not just bodily autonomy, but community sovereignty, has really opened my eyes to see the amount of work that needs to be done. But even though this panel has just started, it gives me hope that there's people who are very well equipped to take on this struggle and have these conversations.
And on behalf of everyone who is here participating today, I want to thank you for being here, for being brave, for being the ones to carry this conversation, because there's so much that I think doesn't get said around these topics. And Ihi talks about shame and unpacking. And I know Rennie's work has been about normalizing these conversations so that we can have these choices and we can feel supported by our families. And I think listening to you all so far, like you're all bringing your mothers into this space. And I know that this conversation is going to be the start of many more in the future for all of us. And so again, thank you for being here. The next question that I'd like to put forth, and I'll put it in the chat also, is about an experience that you folks have had with abortion, whether it's been as someone who is pregnant, or as a caregiver, or a family member, or a friend. Just at this time, I want to ask you if you would share your experiences with the group.
I think you may need to call on one of us, Kainoa.
I can totally call on you folks. This is a question that I know is going to be emotional for a lot of us. And so I guess before I ever ask somebody to share, I feel like you have to blaze by being brave and by sharing also. And so the reason that I chose to be a part of this webinar, a part of this space, is because it's something that, or abortion is something that I'm still trying to process for myself. I have had an abortion and it was extremely emotional and traumatic. And I don't think that I have done the work to really process what that means for me. And so with that, just want to open the space to allow everyone to be vulnerable. And I don't ever want to push you guys. But with that being said, I want to invite Annette to go first, if you feel comfortable.
For me, I have not had an abortion. I did get pregnant when I was younger. And as a woman who loves God, it was scary. And yet all that, you know, the religious viewpoint on it that I grew up with, still as a woman who loved God, sitting with that decision, I had chosen to get an abortion. Before my appointment, I miscarried. And however horrible it sounds, I was so relieved because I was so afraid of what going through an abortion and what trauma, you know, how that would hurt me. When I found out when we got the horrible news of Roe versus Wade being overturned, for me, that was even bigger than just abortion. We're talking about violating bodily autonomy for women. And when we are talking about times in my life where I wasn't in the position to give consent on what happens to my body and what my body is going to do, those were only times of sexual abuse and of violence. And, you know, so it triggered all this other stuff. And this whole everything, you know, it's the shaming, and that's, you know, that's going all the way back to choosing a name for it, why it's my Gila and don't be shamed. There's so much shame we carry. Women experience these things and there's so much pain associated with it. And then on top of that, we're shamed for it and we judge ourselves, and, you know, we're under that critique. And I just wanted to be sure that, you know, I was stepped outside my comfort zone and to be here today, just to be a part of a voice that is non-judgmental and compassionate, which I think we lack that. Even our own self-talk, you know, that what we're saying to ourselves can lack so much compassion. And just wanting to be part of this, and in a room with other, you know, with other women who are supporting each other and being compassionate and just opening up the dialogue for that, the non-judgmental, the my Gila, the, you know, we sit in the darkness of things where we carry shame with it when we don't realize that we have a bunch of friends sitting in that same room. You know, that there's so many of us that are sitting with the same shame, the same struggle, the same pain, the same darkness. And, you know, that we can love and support each other in the light.
Mahalo, Annette. You brought up a lot of, I think, themes that a lot of women experience around abortion. Shaming, the pain, that internal, I guess, tension between, you know, family expectations, societal expectations, religious conditioning. And so there's a lot around this topic. And I feel like we all have stories around it. And I'm guessing that Dr. Rennie Soon has heard so many stories being an abortion practitioner and sitting with women while they make these decisions. And so, Dr. Soon, would you be willing to share an experience that you've had?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, mahalo, Annette, for sharing. One of my goals is, as you mentioned, Kainoa, to really destigmatize abortion in our community. So, you know, in sharing an experience, in a time again when abortion is so stigmatized, and I see so many patients seeking abortion who feel that shame that we've been talking about. I wanted to share that I had an abortion. Mine was not a heart-wrenching decision. I was in college and I knew that having a child would change my life trajectory, would make finishing college much more difficult, achieving my goals that much harder. So for me, it was a no-brainer, and I have never regretted that decision. And now that I have, two boys who are my world, I also know that I potentially, would not have made the same decisions that brought me to them, that allows me to raise them the way that I want to if I had continued the pregnancy. So mine was a decision made with love for myself, made with love for the family I was going to have. But I just want to also take a moment to recognize the hundreds, maybe now thousands of patients I've cared for over the 20 plus years that I've been doing this work. And as we kind of, have already been talking about, we know people, we either are people who've had abortions or we know people who've had abortions. They are in our families, they're our friends, they're our neighbors, our teachers, our bus drivers, our lawyers, so many of us have had abortions and so many of us don't talk about it. And I know there's sometimes a lot of trauma, and I respect and I acknowledge that not everyone is in a space to talk about their abortion, but I think the silence overall is what is hurting us. And I tell my patients who sometimes feel so guilty and such shame that you are not making some horrific decision. It's one in 4 pregnant, capable people will make this decision in their lifetime. I think of the patient who had been thrilled to be pregnant, to only find out that her child that was, I'm not sure, maybe 2 or 3 years old, had been diagnosed with a horrific disease. And they were told that she likely had just months to live. And so she made an extremely difficult decision to terminate her pregnancy so that nothing would take away her attention from her child in their remaining days together. I think of the woman crying in my office, explaining how hard she was working every day to raise her 3 kids, working a full-time job, owning her own business, taking care of her mother who was having problems with her health. This was a very professional looking woman when she first walked in, and then she just broke down crying from the weight and the burden of all that she was doing and the guilt she was feeling in choosing to have an abortion. These are decisions made out of love. And yet oftentimes we don't feel that we can reach out for support, the support that we oftentimes need. And that's why we really need to destigmatize abortion, talk about it as much as we can. So I really appreciate this space. Mahalo.
Mahalo. I think going back to Kuwanet, something that you've made me really think about in regards to this shame and like my hila. It's important that we acknowledge these feelings of shame and guilt, but I think it's equally as important to name the source of these feelings and who gave them to us and where it came from. So I feel like we can't talk about this shame without talking about how patriarchy makes these things so difficult to think about, how colonization is the reason why so many of us don't know these practices of abortion care or like these mele or these chants that are dedicated to a hine and kanaka who can birth. Yeah, that's something that I'm currently thinking about now. I myself have never had an abortion, but when this question was posed to us, it instantly made me think about when I was a sophomore in high school. And like when you're a sophomore, you're essentially like a baby. I still look like a baby right now, but one of my friends was pregnant with someone who was much like older than us. And like thinking back, and this is the first time I've ever really reflected on this since then, it was such a scary time. And as someone who, both of us came from a religious background, from a school who really promoted celibacy, we didn't know where we could go to besides our friend group to talk about this kind of stuff. And I remember sitting in the bathroom and all of us like on our phones, Googling how to terminate a pregnancy, which is something no young person should ever have to do. And it could have put them in a lot of danger as well. So just thinking about how in regards to access to abortion, and part of that access being limited because of stigma, there's so much we didn't know. Who knew that Plan B isn't effective if you're over 100, or less effective if you're over 150 pounds? We had no idea that being considered 2 weeks pregnant, you're actually like pregnant longer than that. So navigating that system and being a support system of 15 and 16-year-olds through that process, it makes me think about how if there wasn't shame and stigma, this person could have gotten better care in that way. Thankfully, they had an older sibling who actually had an abortion. But oftentimes I look back and think of how different things could have been if we took things into our own hands and they didn't have that guidance, that person that they confided in differently. So I mean, now that I'm older, it makes me think about how it's our kuleana or our responsibility as the next generation of wahine and kanaka to be that stepping stone for our opia to open up these kinds of conversations and provide that care for them. Yeah.
Well, mahalo everybody for sharing so far. So my experience that I wanted to share about is about when I had made this decision to have an abortion. I was already a mom. I was a single mom. I was working from like 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. I had thousands of dollars in student debt from having gone to grad school and gotten an advanced degree. I was in the early stages of a relationship with the Kane, who is now my husband and the father of our 2 other children. But it was a very early stage in our relationship, or it was an early stage of our relationship. And there was, at the time, there was, really nothing that I wanted more than to become a mom again, have another child, because I just absolutely adored my daughter, my older daughter. But I wasn't at a place in my life where I could have been a solid mom, and wasn't at a point in a relationship where we could have really been parents together in the ways that I wanted. So I definitely have to say that I wouldn't be where I am today in my life had I not been able to choose that it wasn't the right time to have a baby at that moment. And it was a difficult decision. It was incredibly hard, because like I said, I wanted nothing more than to have more kids. So I was at the time though taking a la'au lapa'au class, and through the readings that we were doing in the books, I just happened to come across like, oh, our kupuna actually had la'au lapa'au to both as forms of contraception as well as abortion. And so we weren't learning those la'au in the class, but just to learn that was something that our kupuna have practiced was really gave me permission to really think about this as a way, and not just to do it in like a highly medicalized environment, because I had been actually with other wahine in my life who I'm very close to when they went to go have an abortion, and it was not necessarily the most spiritually supportive kind of process. It was highly medicalized, and so I in relying on the experience that we were going through and learning in this la'au lapa'au class, one of the things was that la'au is always given with pule, that you're in pule when you gather, when you're in pule when you prepare, you're in pule when you partake. So I had no idea. I'm not saying that anything that we did was in any way a traditional practice, but we were kind of guided by those principles. and wanted to involve our kupuna in the process of making the decision and in actually going through the process of having the abortion. So for the first, I would say like 2.5 months, I just prayed and I chanted, called upon my ancestors. Should I have this baby? Should I have the abortion? What should I do? And I was very torn. And I remember being the whole Ailona that I finally kind of received was I was on this pali overlooking the ocean, and the ocean is a really healing place for me, and also a place where our ancestors come from and go back to. And so I was chanting there, and there were two and this is a pali on the Hamakua coast on the Big Island, which is also a place where my kupuna are from, although I was raised on Oahu. And there were two koa'e that flew across like my line of sight a few times as I was chanting. Two birds, yeah. And as I was kind of finishing up, they flew out to the ocean. No, I'm sorry, they flew up to the valley. And then they flew down, and there were 3 of them. And then they flew out to the ocean. And the whole Ailona that I took that as was my kupuna coming to say, it's okay. We're, the uhane of this child that you may have brought into the world at this time is still here. We're going to take them to be with the kupuna, and they'll be fine. And that was a day when I decided, okay, I'm gonna, have this abortion and wait until the time is right in my life. So it doesn't mean it was easy, but throughout, having the ability to connect with my kupuna, who are beyond the bodies that we have in this world, reminds us that we are part of this ongoing mo'okuauhau and continuum, that having an abortion isn't choosing to end life. Yeah, that's not the way that I see it. Mahalo.
Mahalo Noi and Rennie, Annette, Ihi for sharing your stories and your truth. I think we've gotten different perspectives about abortion from different practitioner, from a mother making decisions for her family, as someone who's not ready to Hanau, who is putting her life trajectory to the forefront. I think there's a lot of different reasons that women have abortions, and all of them are valid. And I think that brings us to kind of the next question, which is why it's important to talk about and to think about abortion and reproductive care as a lahui. And so Ihi especially brought in these themes of guilt, of patriarchy, of colonization. And she asked a question for everybody, like, where are these sources of guilt coming from? Why are we feeling the way that we feel? Why is that stigma still there? Why is this form of medical care? Why is this really personal and spiritual decision kind of judged by the entire world? So on that note, a question once again, why is it important for us as a lahui to think about and talk about abortion and reproductive care? So Dr. Soon, would you be willing to speak to this question first?
Sure. I am just dying to hear what the other Wahine have to say about this, because you know, I have to admit, in my day-to-day of doing this work, I'm not always thinking about this question. And so this was a really great question to think about. I think, you know, I think about what Ihi said, and that is so true. One of the most infuriating things for me about the recent SCOTUS decision, the majority decision that was written by Justice Alito, and there was a lot of infuriating things about it. And I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really pontificate on all aspects of this decision, but one of the ways that he justified overturning almost 50 years of precedent in Roe v. Wade was to say that abortion is not in our history. It is not one of our historical traditions. And I immediately thought, this white man has no idea what he's talking about. Of course, it's in our history. It's in the history of every single civilization. Abortion was always done. You know, the pregnancy and birth knowledge keepers in every civilization knew how to abort a pregnancy. So abortion is a part of the spectrum of pregnancy and reproductive health. You cannot have pregnancy and birth without having pregnancy and abortion. Because I do full spectrum OBGYN, I have had patients come to me for an abortion, and in the following year, under different circumstances, they come to me for prenatal care and birth. And then they come to me when they've had a miscarriage, which, by the way, the medical term for is a spontaneous abortion. So it is a spectrum. And I am not going to say that I know a whole lot about Hawaiian birthing practices, but I have talked with many who do. And you know, as Noi was talking about, our kupuna knew this. They had this knowledge. They knew that there was sometimes a need for abortion. And so, you know, it is key for us to, as Ihi said, think about, you said it so well, think about where that stigma comes from. And it definitely comes from, you know, this, I mean, people like Justice Alito, you know, who's saying that that wasn't in our history or in our traditions. There's nothing more incorrect than saying that. So that's why it's critical for our lahui to be talking about this and acknowledging that abortion is in our history, it is in our traditions.
Mahalo, Dr. Soon. Noi?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow to say that Kealoha Fox has really shared, you know, about her research, and could be an amazing resource, you know, who we don't have here today, but she's talked a lot about how just what Rennie said, that, you know, abortion has been part of our Hawaiian tradition. One of the spectrum, one of the options, you know, one of the ways of care. It was at one point a normal practice, which isn't to say that everybody was having abortions all the time. It just means that it was one, you know, option to ways to care for people who became pregnant, as well as contraception and you know, but why, you know, the question about why is it important for our lahui to think about abortion and to talk about it right now, I think is really important in terms of remembering that we're still under US occupation. And when the Supreme Court of the US makes decisions that impact Kanaka bodies, that is a deep manifestation of US occupation and our ability to have healthy ohana and healthy communities. And so it's really important for us to be able to name that, yeah, and to be able to say that part of being self-determining, part of exercising our ea is about getting to decide, for pregnant people, getting to decide whether we birth or not, as the title of our panel today expresses. So I think it's so important for us to talk about it on that level, and then also for the reasons that we began with in terms of sharing some of our stories and experiences. Like, it's not something that is discussed in our communities, so that we can wrap folks who are considering this as a possible decision that they may need to make, wrap them with care, and give them options. I just think breaking that silence is really important, because it was certainly something that I experienced even as a 30-year-old who was already a mom. But I mean, I can't imagine, as he was sharing, for 15 and 16-year-olds or even younger folks who are having to think about these things. So I just really think it's important for us to address it from a Hawaiian perspective.
I'm just going to say, I had to really do meditation and pray that I was going to get through this without swearing. But Noi said I could drop the F-bomb. She gave me permission. But I think it's important for us to talk about it as a Lahui, because the same colonial patriarchal behavior of manipulation and gaslighting and exploitation that block us from our bodily autonomy, block us from our Kanaka autonomy. To me, like everything, I tend to see things through and tie things together, whether it's, Hawaiian rights or just like the bullshit that we deal with as Hawaiians, and say like, well, that, that's the equivalent of this for women, like telling women, why don't you smile more? You should smile. You should smile. Hey, where's your smile? Is like the same of asking Hawaiians, where's the aloha spirit? And I think talking about it as a lahui, because feminism needs to be decolonized. It's like, on my Hila Hila, after the overturning of Roe versus Wade and certain posts, there's all these new followers. Come 4th of July, and the posts that are about, not my Independence Day, and the followers drop. It's like, I don't get the that people don't see it's all connected. Not all people, right? But when they don't see that, the same mindset that puts a woman in a subhuman category, that thinks that we're not able to, or give us the right, we're not able to make decisions for our own body. They don't care what we want. This is the same group of people that would look at Native Hawaiian rights and be dismissive towards that, and what Native Hawaiians want for our own people, our own land, our own culture. And so I think it's important that we talk about it, because it's all tied together. It's all tied together.
Yep. Ka ko'opiha. Yeah, that was awesome. Something that Kumana brought up was this idea of feminism. And I think specifically liberal feminism has totally seeped its way into the ways we think about reproductive justice and care. And just like from my own mana'o, so much of how reproductive justice has been centered in America and in Hawaii it's all predicated on personal choice. It's their choice or not to have an abortion. It's their choice or not like to do X, Y, and Z. But I think if we're thinking about this from a Kanaka perspective, understanding that abortion, it's a community, maybe a personal decision, but something that the whole community takes part in terms of before care, after care. It shouldn't be something that Kanaka have to go through alone. But in thinking about this question, perhaps in a different light, the topic of Native Hawaiian health has been gaining traction, especially with the Haumea report by Dr. Kilo Fox, which is awesome. And it made me think about how, off the top of our head, when we think about Native Hawaiian health, instantly a lot of us think about food, our diet, how a lot of us have predispositions towards like diabetes, heart disease. And so that's such a huge aspect of Native Hawaiian health that I do think is really important and something we should be paying attention to. But also thinking about Native Hawaiian health is reproductive care, reproductive justice, and access to abortion. And in a larger context, we always hear this phrase, ho'olulahui, to grow lahui. And going back to patriarchy and misogyny, I think a lot of that kuleana comes down to women having kanaka babies and that pressure to produce and to have children because that's the way to grow lahui. And also in the words and thoughts of Kumuhanani Ketras, there's other ways to grow lahui, to be slightly reproductive, to choose and weave your own mo'oku ahau. And part of that choosing is abortion and reproductive care. And especially as someone who's queer, who doesn't know if or when I'll have keiki, people asking me like, oh, when are you gonna have like a child? Like, when are you gonna have kids? As if I'm not co-parenting with my two other sisters. Like, I do have kids. I have 6 nieces. Like, they're my keiki. And yeah, so thinking about ho'olahui, what it means to grow our lahui, and part of that growth is growing it in the healthiest way possible. And we can't move forward or grow lahui in the best way if we don't understand that, one, abortion care is a part of Native Hawaiian health, and 2, it's a lahui effort to end the stigma and to support folks who choose to have an abortion or choose not to. Yeah, mahalo.
So that was absolutely beautiful, and you took my job and summed everything up perfectly. But abortion care is care for lahui. We as women and our health, part of the overall health of our communities and overall health of our lahui, and our ability to make these decisions for ourselves, for our ohana, are part of the greater conversation about supporting one another in community, in expressing our in creating the futures and the communities that we want to see in Hawaii and beyond. And so for our last question, which I feel like will give greater depth to what we have already been talking about, but how is abortion care connected to Ea Hawaii, or our Hawaiian independence? Is there anybody who would like to start this question?
Just throw a few things on the table to get it started. So I think for one thing, you know, and I'm not saying this is like what all Hawaiians believe, but some of the folks who were really important in my life, elders who taught me that for babies who are born, you know, that when their uhane or their wailua comes into them is when they take their first air, when they take their first breath. So as I said, I think asking the question that is so often animating American debates about abortion, when does life begin? I don't think we ask that same question from a Hawaiian perspective, because life is always in existence, that we are part of this ongoing continuum, right? And we manifest in certain forms, so I think that's one thing to say, you know, it's just that when we think about and breath, life, independence, that all those things are contained in that word. I think it's really important to think about what did your kupuna teach you about what that might be. And for me, you know, what I was taught was that the baby first animates when they take their first on their own. So that's one thing I wanted to just kind of put out there. The other thing I wanted to kind of shifting gears a bit is really to think about how um, access to abortion and limiting access to abortion, disproportionately impacts the most struggling among us, right? People who are in very difficult socioeconomic circumstances, people who have been dealing with sexual assault and trauma, people whose family members who may be assisting giving care for babies may be incarcerated or dealing with substance abuse. I mean, all the things that are Lahui is overrepresented in terms of those kinds of social, socioeconomic phenomenon because of our political status bears upon abortion. So like we can't think about all of those other issues without also thinking about how it is that we bring babies into the world or, choose not to. Like I work in education and I know that people, as going back to Rennie's story, like people in college who need to finish degrees are often put in this situation. And if they were forced to have a baby, it would significantly slow down their ability to finish their degree, right? And that would impact the education levels of our people. And I'll just share that Kumuhau Nanike Trust, when I was an undergrad in Hawaiian studies, one of the things that she always used to tell us is don't have a baby until you graduate from college. And, that was one way I think of talking to us about reproductive decisions that we might make. And I'm not saying that should be everybody's decision, but, the reason why she told us that is because there were very few Hawaiians, right, in college, in faculty ranks, and she wanted more of us to get through. And so I think for all of those reasons, we have to be able to talk about the possibility of abortion.
Ihi, would you like to follow up on her question? Or Kalamai, I see multiple people's mics. So I'm just gonna mute myself and you guys got it.
Yeah, I think Dr. Soon unmuted, so I'll pass it off to her.
Oh, I really was waiting for others, but I just when thinking about this question, I'm just gonna kind of ask Annette and Ihi to kind of talk a little bit more also about the colonization. And I mean that is, I think, really. So this question made me think of, several years ago, I did a research project where I was asking Native Hawaiians, and I did some focus groups about pregnancy and their thoughts about pregnancy, and also to ask them about abortion. And some of the answers that I got from a lot of people was that abortion is not Hawaiian. That's not Hawaiian. That's not who we are. And it kind of surprised me, but then it kind of didn't, because I think that, going back to, again, what Annette and Ihi have been talking about, I think a lot of that is in the same way that we almost lost, our knowledge of Hawaiian language, and we almost lost hula because, the acts of colonization and making us believe that that's not, or separating us from our history and separating us from the knowledge that we have had. So I think, when we think about we have to really recognize and honor the place that abortion has had in our history, in order to really better come to understand who we are as a people. But I really, really appreciate this conversation. So I'm going to stop and hand it off to others.
Mahalo, Dr. Soon. Ihi, would you like to go next?
I can. So yeah, so how is abortion care connected to Air Hawaii and Hawaiian independence? This makes me think about how there's a difference between pure political sovereignty, where Air or sovereignty, it's just in a treaty or in a flag. But I know that all of us here today know that it's so much more than that. And part of political sovereignty, and the way that I think about it, the occupied Hawaii, is bodily autonomy and the choice to care for ourselves in the way that we want to, both individually and as a community. We're also still very much in the process of creating the deoccupied Hawaii that we wanted to see. I know Kumuno and other Kumu have used this, but like a deoccupied Hawaii is kind of like being hapai or carrying a child, where we don't know what this keiki is gonna look like yet. But in thinking about the things we want for this child, we can kind of guess the features that it will have. And so for mine, reproductive justice and the right to have abortion care is totally going to be in my /our deoccupied Hawaii. Going, I guess, a little bit further, something that I think we need to understand is, although like we say it in our hearts and we say it in our sleep that we are not American, we also have to wrestle with the fact that we've been so Americanized and so hyper individualistic, that part of having these conversations of reproductive justice and abortion care is just as much a part of decolonization as learning our language and learning other traditional practices. And as a lot of folks have said, especially Kawakioli, it can be breath to rise. But I think of the context of today and our struggles, it can also be to choose, especially when we know that Wahine have always had that choice traditionally. And honestly, like access to abortion is just as much a part of our ea as any other struggle is. It's just as important as Mauna Kea. It's just as important as Kapukaki. And I think sometimes we romanticize ea and our struggles for it. So it's not always us singing kuha'aheo. It's not always us sitting on the front line. It's not always these romantic ways that we think about like ea and sovereignty. And I think in times we think of like this romantic relationship to ea, we trade that for the intimacy that we could actually have with each other, with our own kino, with our community. And so in doing so, like we limit the ways we know ourselves and we can love Hui. Something that I want to bring up, I know we don't have enough time, but really briefly, is this issue gets pawned off as something that's haole, that, oh, it's something that happened in America or in DC, so we shouldn't talk about it. The same thing happens with LGBTQ and Mahu issues, and it's not haole, because what happens in America, because we're occupied, like it affects us, and I think we really have to come to terms with that. But yeah, very like in summary, that's what it is. Yeah, mahalo.
Mahalo, Ihi. Annette, would you like to add to this question?
I've gotten, a lot of comments where it's like, what are you so worried about? What are you complaining about? Abortions are still legal in Hawaii, you know? And that I'm thinking of, and we're not free until we're all free. We're not safe until we're all safe. How quickly, the life begins at conception is rooted in Christianity. So what about the separation of church and state, freedom of religion? So it's like any person's cultural belief, religious belief, like that's good, good for you to apply to your individual life and circumstance in that moment. But women not having, or people capable of pregnancy not having that option to make that self-determination. And then and everything that comes from it, you know. So like I've said, I tend to see things through a lens of family violence. So quickly they could overturn Roe versus Wade, you know, and put it into place. I want to say that the most absolutely disgusting thing about this are states that have made no exceptions for rape and incest. When we, in the work that I do in family violence, there's some nightmare situations that, you know, the typical person gets to look at it as a worst case scenario, you know, that you don't ever hear about it. When you work in family violence, you see it daily. You see it daily. So when that decision was made, there are faces of women that popped in my head and have been haunting me ever since. We have a flooded foster care system. We have a child welfare service system that's failing because they're so swamped. And so abortion as a medical intervention is taken away in some places, completely taken away. So where are the interventions, the replacement, the alternatives to that? You know, and that goes back to that colonial patriarchal system and the forcing where it's women, you know, to tell people, okay, well, the fetus, that is a full, we're gonna treat that as a full person. So you can't make no decisions for yourself because that's a person. But you think about finances, let's look at everything. So you can change it, you can change the rule and the laws that fast. You can overturn Roe versus Wade that quickly without thinking about all the considerations that would have to be made. So finances is a big decision. I mean, a big factor in it. But there's nothing that has changed with that. Child support should start from the confirmation of pregnancy. There's all of this punishment in place for the woman, and nothing is being discussed about. So what's the punishment for men? When a woman is left alone with that pregnancy to deal with that pregnancy, but the male bails on it. So like harsher punishment, like, you know, like but then it's like, okay. And then the recent one with like the woman that was in the carpool lane and she's like, no, this baby counts. I can drive in the carpool lane. But how quickly they could overturn it. And it's like, oh, well, we don't have the time to, you know, all these additional factors to consider. And it's like, yeah, that's our damn point. That when it comes to a woman making that decision, there's too many factors that have to be considered. And that's why that women should have the right to it. You know, and even, you know, when finding, you know, once Roe versus Wade was overturned and sitting with that and thinking about, you know, children that are, you know, I've had to do that work and sit with young children that are pregnant as a result of sexual assault. And to think that even as a child, there are children that won't be able to access an abortion. You know, and then there's you know, real cases that are popping up like that, right? And it's blasting all over the news and social media, and we're hearing about it. People are like, oh, well, that's like the worst case scenario. It's like, it's not. It happens way more than you think, you know, and that's why it needs to be in place to where women can choose, where we can be protected. There's so much punishment and there's so much shame around it. The leading cause of death for pregnant women is homicide. So intimate partner violence increases during pregnancy. The risk of a woman being killed during pregnancy and within that first year increases. So let's talk about that. There are women, where's all the resources? Where's the funding for more programs to protect the women? You know, it's like, this shit pisses me off. You know, it's disgusting to me. It's disgusting. And it's like, I cannot believe we're doing this. I think about the women, you know, all the feminists before it, you know, I can't imagine 50 years later sitting for everything that you know, it's like you fought for it and you think you helped create this better world, which they did. But then to be sitting around, you know, an old lady thinking, what the hell are we doing? Are we doing this again? How are we doing this again? There are to make something, to change law, and to be so quick about doing that without, and then using the excuse for all of these, you know, these, how it impacts and the way to apply this to other areas. And it's, and the excuse, well, there's no time, you know, well, we'll have to consider that. We'll have to consider that. It's disgusting to me, you know, and I get real pissed off on this topic, which is why I was so anxious about actually participating, because, you know, I get so upset. And I'm like, maintain your professionalism, but it's like, I got none on this, you know, it's personal. It's personal. I'm pissed. The women who have reached out to me, and who I don't know, through my Hila Hila, to tell their stories, because there's so many people that don't have anyone to talk to. One woman had told me, and it just made me cry and cry. She said, I'm worried for my daughters. I'm worried for my nieces. And I'm so worried about all the people out there that have no one worrying for them. That broke my heart. It broke my heart, you know, and like, I've thought, like, you know, I have my 13-year-old son is, you know, a self-proclaimed feminist, and, you know, so is my boyfriend, you know. And I'm just surrounded. The men in my life totally support me, you know, and even over the next few days, I'd just be sitting there and my son would, you know, be like, what, are you okay? Yeah. He's like, what are you thinking about? Women's rights? You know, like paranoid for me because I was so damn upset. And I was thinking, like, you know, for the people that go home and you don't have that support, you know, and you have to sit even in your own home. But I never, just that phrase of, and all the people out there who don't, I'm worried for all the people out there who don't have someone worrying for them. That just broke my heart so much, you know. But yeah, I mean, I can go verbal diarrhea on this and so I'll pause there.
No, and that you were saying so much that a lot of us are feeling. Like, we are all collectively angry, and we all want to know, you know, how we're all going to deal with our individual and collective trauma around this issue. And it ties into not just our own personal choice, but the choices of our communities and of our people, and the way that the US and the US government can impose its values or its thoughts about how we should exist is extremely problematic. And so I, yes, absolutely agree that I think all of our people should be feminist, you know, like, everybody should understand that women and our issues, or how they're termed, are human issues. And to echo what I think all of you have said thus far, like, women's issues are human issues. And as long as there are people who are having their bodily autonomy affected by outside forces. Okay, none of us collectively are free. And so I feel like anger is totally a valid emotion in this time. And there's so much that I think we can do to build off of our collective anger. And we had a question from an audience member that gets to this. How can our communities activate and mobilize to ensure abortion care remains safe and legal here in Hawaii? Ihi, can you speak to this? And then I know Dr. Soon, you have some that you can share about ways that people can support.
Sounds good. First thing you can do is hit the streets and get politically organized. So I'll plug this right now. Joining Affirm Hawaii would be a great way to get connected, to start or join in on this fight that's been happening for a while. We're hitting the streets, but also we're going to be hitting policy. So best believe that we're going to be holding our legislators and folks running for office accountable. So that dual system of being in the community, hitting the streets, but also working on policy. If you're interested in that, join Affirm. There's also the Hawaii Abortion Collective. So getting connected to that organization is awesome. Affirm is also a part of that, but there's more organizations involved as well. Affirm Hawaii has also started a grassroots abortion fund for folks in Hawaii who need access to travel, abortion care, or active care. I can put it in the chat after I'm done speaking. But yeah, those are all really great ways to join Affirm. Or not join Affirm, but get connected to this movement. So going to the protests and the marches, those are super awesome. Those are super important. But getting politically informed and also politically organized in Affirm or even another organization that talks about these issues would be the best thing to do. Yeah, mahalo. I'll pass it off to Dr. Soon.
Mahalo for all that. And for this question, and Annette, I share your rage. I appreciate you speaking on all that. Don't worry about the diarrhea of the mouth. Like I totally share your rage. So ways, I mean, I echo all of what Ihi was saying. So important to, really be vigilant about what's going on in our communities, the policies that are being made. Be sure to recognize also the intersectionality of abortion, that also things like, housing, employment, living wages, education, all of those things are tied into access to abortion, access to sex education. So it is, I ask that we remain vigilant, not only to issues immediately about abortion, but understanding the place that those decisions are being made in is not in a vacuum. And then, Ihi mentioned the abortion fund, Hawaii Abortion Fund. In addition, there is also Reproductive Justice Fund via the University of Hawaii Foundation that we created through with the Women's Option Center. I'm an abortion provider at the Women's Option Center as well as at Planned Parenthood. The Women's Option Center is located in Queens, and we provide in-clinic abortions, telemedicine abortions to all islands and to Guam as well. Anyone in need can contact us, or if you wish to donate, there's information in the chat as well. But I also encourage people, as we've been doing, to really talk about abortion using the word abortion. Talk about it in your circles, in your personal circles, in your professional circles, really to increase access. People are always asking me, how do we get more providers? How do we get more providers on islands and in the communities that don't have access? We need to, as a larger community, accept and promote abortion as part of the normal spectrum of reproductive health care. So that's why I love this forum, the opportunity to talk about abortion. Please keep doing this, keep talking about abortion. let's get rid of the stigma. And yeah, I think that's some of the really important things that our communities can do.
I'll just piggyback on that real quickly to say, you know, continuing the conversation is so important. We've only just scratched the surface. And one thing I really want to mark is that, you know, we haven't on this panel yet because we didn't have the time and we didn't have as many people as we could have wanted. We didn't really give space as there should be space for the specific kinds of experiences that trans and non-binary folks who become pregnant are dealing with. And so that's a really important conversation that needs to happen. And Naho Ihoe is totally down for helping to support holding space for that conversation. And on the, you know, on the tip about destigmatizing, I just want to add to that to say that no wahine, no kanaka who has had an abortion or who is considering having abortion should ever feel shame or should ever feel like the decision that they're making makes them less Hawaiian. We need to love each other for the decisions that we make for our families and our communities and ourselves, and whatever we can do in our personal lives to assist alleviating that shame, you know, and whether it's just talking about it or just giving the people that you love a hug or sharing the stories and experiences that you may have. I think those are all on the personal level, you know, ways to do that work in addition to the awesome organizing and donating suggestions that have already been put up there. Mahalo.
Mahalo everyone for being a part of this panel today. And if you would like to continue in this type of space, if you would like to join our next poetry workshop that's going to be happening right after we are done here, in the chat, there's the link where you can register to be a part of that. But once again, it's going to be another space where we are going to be able to process what abortion means to ourselves and our communities. It's a space where we can continue to have these conversations because, as the panelists have said, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to be said, to be processed, and to be done to make sure that we create a Hawaii and we create a place and a future where people who can become pregnant can be honored as fully human, as fully expressing their own individual and collective ea. And so on that note, I'd like to thank everyone once again for being a part of this conversation. And let's continue to have this conversation together in spaces and time until we get to the point where we no longer have to. And I hope that we're able to get to that point in our lifetimes, but it's going to take our collective work and our collective dedication. So mahalo, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Mahalo.
Thank you. Bye.
Hello, Nui. And are we jumping over to the other room for the workshop?
Yes.
Okay.
See you folks there. Mahalo for all the bye-bye that you shared.
Mahalo, Nui.